Susanne.
Woohoo! All right. Thank you, Claudia. Well, welcome everyone. As Claudia said, this is our 13th. We're doing another trip around the sun. And this has just been so fun for me because I learn a lot every time I start doing research on something, I learn a lot more. So thanks for joining us tonight. And we're going to look at a collection from Monet to Matisse. It's a special exhibit that the Crocker Art Museum is hosting from the Dixon Gallery and Gardens. And that, for you California people, is not Dixon outside of Vacaville. This is Dixon from Memphis, Tennessee. So, I love this show. I mean, well, okay, heck, I love most of the shows that are there. So we are very fortunate and to have this. A little about the Dixon Gallery and Gardens is that they were founded in 1976, so they're a recently new museum. They were it's founded by Hugo and Margaret Dixon. The Dixons loved French and American Impressionists and went to town putting together a gorgeous collection of these masterpieces. And right now, I think their collection is well over 2,000 pieces, and these two philanthropists bequeathed their home. The gallery is their home, and plus 17 acres of well-known gardens, and it's a public space for art. So it's on my list. I'm going to go back there and take a look at it because it just looks fantastic. This exhibit has about 51 pieces, and a lot of the work is in the early to mid phase of the Impressionist experiment. And if you are thinking of the Monet lilies or the Van Gogh Starry Nights or anything, this is not that exhibit. This is a very subtle, quiet, understated show, and it really, to me, brings out some of the best skills of the Impressionist artists. It is a nice retrospect that kind of shows the influence of the later Barbizon painters, how the influence that they had on the Impressionists themselves, and then their influence on later artists, the Fauvists, the Cubists, the abstract painters that followed. So let's go to our next slide. All right, Claudia. And, most of you know me, I'm a history nerd. So I want to start sharing some of the major events that led up to this art shift, because I think it's important to lay that groundwork. Because when the Impressionists emerged in Paris in the 1860s and more vigorously in the 1870s and beyond, they changed how art was done and what it was looking like. Nothing like it had been before, and nothing like it was going to happen again. So the first thing is, how did the Impressionist revolt begin? So the first thing is that the French academic system itself and the exhibition program in Paris. Now, this entity was called the Paris Salon, and you may have heard about this. We've talked about it briefly in some of the other tours that we've done. And every year, thousands of artists would submit their work to the annual salon. And the salon was sometimes held in the Palais Champ, or it's usually really huge, giant buildings like the Cow Palace in San Francisco. They were huge and successful events. People came out in droves to see these. So the French academic system had a huge weakness, though. And it was that absolutely quelled anything that was not in their model of art making. There was no room for real innovation within the French academic system. So here's a print of one of the salons, and in this building, 4,000 to 5,000 pieces of art would be hung, and they all look similar. The sameness was about them. And there was not much intentional for change. And the Impressionists represented this first major breach of that art. And it's true, people have asked, no, their work was not accepted here. They were even the beginnings, if you did not toe the line on what the acceptable art was, your art was never hung. And the interesting thing about the these shows is that the lower the art was to the eye level, the better the artist that they considered. So if you were way up on the top, it was like, yeah, okay, you got hung in the Paris exhibit, but you know, you're not as good as the guy below you. So anyway, let's go to our next slide. All right. There we go. And so the second thing is the invention of photography. Now, this starts at almost the exact same time as the Impressionists really start coming into vogue. And this is a photo of Felix Nadar. He's probably the most famous Parisian photographer, and he was a shameless self-promoter. And so you see him, this is all a staged photo that in him, and he just did these, but they became incredibly popular. And the Impressionists embraced photography because they felt that photography brought actual realism into play. And so there was no need to continue painting these realistic style paintings. And the photo on the right is Nadar's studio. And that's important because the Impressionists rented that studio to hold their first salon. So let's go to our next one. And as we're going here, if you have questions, just shout it out, or comments. All right, let's go. There we go. The next was the influx of Japanese art into Paris, starting about in the 1850s. You know, and it was on this closed society and brilliant aesthetic then becomes available to everyone. The French went crazy for it. It was in the clothing, in the furniture. Everything had a Japanese style to it, and no one was more wild about it than these French vanguard artists, the Impressionists. And I know several of you have been to Giverny, and Monet had he loved it. There you go, Claudia.
My Giverny scarf on.
There you go. And Monet loved the Japanese woodblock prints. And he had more than 200 of these Japanese woodblock prints, including the Great Wave, in his home in Giverny. And so they were all over the place. He was quite influenced by them, as were many of the other artists. The painting I want to mention on the left is The Final Touch, and it's by Paul Helou. And it is a magnificent work done with pastels using very few colors. And as you can see, you know, that Helou is heavily influenced by the Japanese woodblock on the right, which is Woman Powdering Her Neck by Kitagawa. And that was from the 1700s. So you know, it's a simple scene. There were a lot of the Japanese did tremendous intimate scenes. And that's where the switch in a lot of the Impressionists started. They were just more intimate and direct scenes. All right, let's go to the next one.
I think it's fascinating when you said that the Impressionists were influenced by photography because they thought, why create something so perfect, like a picture, when you have photographs? I thought that was an interesting comment.
Yeah, well, you know, that it's very little said. Now, the other is this is the rise of the Barbizon School. And the Barbizon School was a small village near Fontainebleau, the forest outside of Paris. And it was kind of a Carmel colony where these artists would go. But it is the first school of painting to embrace landscape. And it also was the first to start doing plein air, or outside painting. And they began painting directly in front of the landscape subject, as opposed to going back to the studios. So that was a big impression a big influence on the Impressionists. And as you can see, this is very much like, a lot of the art is still very detailed. It is not that quick brushstroke. The brushstrokes are very short and detailed, So it is a little different, but it did have great influence on the Impressionists. This is Theodore Rousseau, who is well known as the Romantic or Barbizon artist. All right, now the last one I want to talk about and is the renovation of Paris. And this is probably talked about the least, but it probably had the greatest influence on the rise of the Impressionist experiments, and that was the rebuilding of Paris. You know, today Paris is known for its wide, grand boulevards, its expansive public gardens, and many, you know, the impressive buildings and beautiful linear. It's very linear. But prior to 1853, Paris was largely, I know where I could think of as a morass of narrow, twisting medieval passageways, as you see on the left. And it was not this grand architecture that distinguishes it today. Now I'm going to have a history nerd alert now, because I want to just give you a little background on how this got started. Emperor Napoleon III, who was the grandnephew of Napoleon I, he lived in exile for most of his life. He returned to Paris, he became president, and then he declared himself emperor, like somebody else we know. And he actually would forever change the face of Paris. And when he named Baron Georges Eugene Haussmann to serve as his equivalent to the director of public works. Now, Haussmann would stay in this role from 1853 to 1870, for 17 years. And during his tenure, he undertook this most ambitious urban planning project that the modern world had ever seen. So his new plan for the city of Paris was, he wanted it to enter into the industrial age. And he demolished 12,000 buildings. He created 85 miles of new roadways to get rid of about 330 miles of these old meandering alleyways. I mentioned that the construction of very ambitious buildings such as the Paris Opera House and these grand, broad avenues full of light, and they were lined by lush green trees. A lot of the citizens were not happy with that because their beloved neighborhoods were torn down, but others really enjoyed this new remake of Paris. And because it had improved transportation, the sewer system went in, running water, green spaces. So the Paris we see today is a direct result of Georges Haussmann. So it was this background, then, this new urban environment, that became the backdrop for the French Impressionists. They began to paint modern life in the avenues and the parks of Paris. They celebrated marvels of engineering with train stations and the rapidly expanded French rail system to paint. And they used it to explore the rural areas beyond the bustle of the city. So it really changed how the Impressionists looked at things, and it also opened up the city. Very, very light. Okay. Any comments on that?
Happened, Suzanne? When did they do this renovation of Paris?
They started in 1853 and they ended in 1870.
Wow.
Okay.
And those buildings are really basically from the 1850s then?
1850s, 60s, 70s, yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
the design. And the mansard roofs that you see on many of the French, that was strictly designed from Haussmann. So and they're just beautiful. You know, you stand there in a boulevard, and I know many of you've been there, you just stand there and you look, and it's just this beautiful linear, everything's in symmetry, and it's absolutely gorgeous. The gardens are in symmetry, the parks, everything. Okay.
And they kept them low because of no elevator.
That's true, Lil. They kept them low. And what they did very smart was that they didn't do infill to them. They didn't start putting huge high rises next to I think the highest building was considered a 5-story at the time. That was,
Yes,
that was the level of what they were allowed to do, but that's absolutely right.
Yeah, and you know, that makes such a difference when you think about New York. You don't get that feeling at all.
No, you get canyons in New York. It's a very cold city, Paris and London too. London is very human feeling. This is a
Yeah.
very, and Paris is a very human feeling. You just,
Well,
it's a
London,
great
they're
scale.
starting, look at what they're doing in London, those modern,
Well, yeah, most of London still retains that human
Yeah,
scale,
yeah.
but they're doing what the Paris did not do what London did. Now they do have high rises, but they're outside this
Yeah.
city center. So, all right,
I'm struck by the colors of the buildings. I just can't imagine any city in the United States taken from this aerial view having so many soft colors to them.
Oh, that's a nice observation, Rhonda. Yeah, they used all the buildings were pretty much built at one time using the same type of stone, and it was a local stone, and it's this kind of it was a darker color, but it has lightened over the years. And it is just beautiful. And those a lot of copper roofs that have turned that beautiful patina. And so it is stunning. It is absolutely stunning. Okay, let's go to our next slide. There's no more comments or questions.
I have one quick question, if you don't mind going back. Can you go back? Yeah. Okay, so I've never been to Paris, so I don't know what to say about directionally, but at approximately 10 o'clock, just off of this circle, the main drag, it almost looks like there is a garden on top of the building. Yes.
It very well may be. A lot of these buildings had rooftop gardens, but all the trees that are planted and then replanted if they die off are the French poplars, and they are beautiful. And that is the Arc de Triomphe. And then as you're looking straight down that main boulevard is the Champs-Élysées. So that is the main street. It's all cobblestone too, by the way. So, and so all these boulevards radiate out. And Claudia and I were talking yesterday, and one of the reasons that Napoleon worked with Haussmann to do this is for the military. So grand marches, and also for protection. So they were able, you could stop invading armies coming in a lot easier. Well, it worked in the opposite direction, because of one of the most stupid blunders Napoleon III did was he declared war on Prussia. Now, Prussia had been building up an army while Napoleon III had been building up Paris. And you don't ever pick on a bigger dog. And the Prussians came through, and they decimated Paris. 4 months it was constant warfare, and they used those boulevards to actually march into Paris and take it over. So it worked both ways, but the city, any destruction was rebuilt, and it was rebuilt without changing the road structure or the building structure.
The only thing to know is don't get too far to the left in the circle there, because you'll never get out.
Oh, that's true, Melissa. Yeah, but here's my question: is why the hell would you ever drive in?
Because you're nuts. Because you're young and foolish.
Yeah. And if you're a big fan of the Tour de France, this is where it ends. It comes up the Champs-Élysées from the Rue Rivoli, past the Louvre, up the Champs-Élysées, around the Arc de Triomphe, and it ends on the Champs-Élysées. And it's a pretty spectacular race if you're into bike racing. Okay.
Thank you.
All righty. Now, I want to talk a little about this one. This is called the paver of the Chailly Road. And it's done by an exquisite artist, and you probably know it's Camille Corot. And this is a good 40 years before the Impressionist story takes hold, but it's a valuable work for the Impressionist story. As I mentioned earlier, the forest of Fontainebleau, with its beautifully varied landscape and easily accessibility from Paris, attracted Corot and many other artists in the early 19th century. It was the Carmel Monterey of the area without the ocean. They were gathering in the small village of Barbizon at the edge of the forest, and that became known as the Barbizon School. Now, Corot's view of the Chailly Road was, this is one of the primary routes for entering the forest, and this piece displays, it really shows his rapid brushwork and how dexterous and skillful he was. He was kind of starting to move from the Barbizon, and he didn't know it, but what the Impressionists would really start to use, and that's rapid brushstroke and also capturing a moment. And it's an intimate scene, relatively. This it's this man paving the road, and it speaks to this scenes of simple laboring people, and I just love this guy in this little red vest, and he's paving the road to Impressionism. So it is a lovely piece, and it is a precursor to where the Impressionists began. And Monet thought Corot was a fantastic artist, and he used a lot of his work also as an inspiration. All right.
Looking at all the different greens in that painting, you know, all
Absolutely.
green.
And that's also what was happening with many of the there was a certain group of Impressionists, and mostly in the California, it was called tonalists, and they started using just very limited tones to depict whatever subject they were doing. And Corot does that very well. It's greens and browns and some tans. The sky's a little had blue and gray, but the most of it is those dark greens, browns, and with that little tiny touch of red on his vest. So
I was going to say before, when we were looking at Paris, the overhead, that you could really spot the red. And I had been in a photography class with my sister Lillian, and the photographer said, always have a little bit of red in your photos. And this really does kind of emphasize that point, that it draws your eye to where the red is.
Exactly. Doesn't need to be a lot. It's just that little flash of it. Okay. Any other comments or questions?
It's beautiful.
Boy, you're really serious about that, Lillian.
Yeah. Well, I think she's using a small. It's challenging if you have a tablet or something.
Yeah,
you don't really.
I just have an iPad.
It's an iPad. You really don't see it. You know, even if it's on the full view, full screen. It's really hard.
No, Rhonda, she is serious about it.
Yeah, sure. We call her Sherlock
to see it.
Rico. Okay, so this is one of the Monets, and let me this is an early Monet, and his family, Claude Monet's family, moved from Paris. He was born in northern France. He went to Paris, and then they moved back to the northern port city of Le Havre when he was 5. And the Normandy beaches would provide Monet with so much inspiration during the first 3 decades of his career. And also it was in this Le Havre that young Monet first met Eugene Boudin. Now Boudin is a well-known artist, was a Barbizon artist that transitioned into Expressionist. And the artist encouraged Monet to paint outdoors and study the various effects of natural light. And that's what Impressionists looked. They searched for the light, and all their paintings were about the light source, dark, shadows, sunlight. And in that moment there, it had, it was a painting that captured a moment.
Was this
So-
early Monet?
Beg your pardon?
Early in his career?
Yeah, this is relatively early in his career. And so this painting was about 4 to 5 years before the first Impressionist show. And Monet and his new bride, Camille, and their son, Jean, visited Trouville. And this is the village street of Trouville on the Normandy coast, where He's most likely on his way to England to wait out the Franco-Prussian War. He already served his time in the French army and he didn't want to serve it again. So he went over to England, and there were quite a few other artists that also went to England too at the time. So the village street, this is most likely painted on that trip. And what it shows is Monet's tendency to kind of omit unnecessary details in favor of more of a broad generalizing impression. So, you know, if you see that you painting the clouds, you know, you notice that Monet loaded his brush with white and gray and a bit of blue, and then he vigorously painted, and that was unknown at that time. You painted a color at a time. You did not multi-color or multi-load your paint with different colors and then paint. So you get this almost swirly effect, but you know what it is, and you know it's the clouds, and you get the feeling of energy and movement, and you also you notice the trees on how they lack detail, but they're very substantial in a way. And again, we mentioned the Japanese influence. This is very much a Japanese influence type of painting, where you have it's kind of a flat in a way, and a horizon's in the back, and then the tree forward gives the illusion of it's being very close, the very tall tree, and then the smaller ones in the back give the illusion of very, very far away. So you know, he also is said that he probably painted this canvas in one sitting. So that kind of demanded great powers of observation and very sure brushwork. He just kind of arrested that moment, and it feels very authentic. It's a very light and dark. The shadows, the darkness are on the left, the light on the right. So it really captures that time of day and reflection of the sun on the buildings. And then you can see a real little sliver of the English Channel right behind you, mid-eye, mid-plane. So it is a lovely piece, and it's one of his early works, and it actually formed a kind of a base for as he started jumping off and really exploring brushstrokes and light. All right. Now I want to show you this next slide, because at this same time in 1869, this is what was being accepted by the Paris Salon. And this was the acceptable art of the time. And this is also a village scene. This is done by Georgina Lara, who's an English painter. It also said that that was a pseudonym for a man. I'm not sure. We'll see. You know, I hear different stories, but very detailed. The sky is much more detailed than Monet. So I wanted to show you this is that Barbizon, more detailed school versus where Monet was going with his study. All right, let's go.
What a vivid contrast.
It is. It is.
It reminds me of gingerbread something.
Yeah, does look like a Snow White thingy, doesn't it? All right. So let me talk about the Impressionist revolution. So before we actually talk about this, and this is a Monet also, I want to discuss where Monet is in 1872 to 73. Remember, he had gone to England, and he is making his way back through Holland to return to Paris, and he is spending time with the Dutch masters, which he is enamored with. He and several of his fellow artists have had a couple of years to explore this kind of newer style, and they're ready for a revolution. And one of the things that's necessary to start a revolution is a little bit of organization. Now, to get these guys who are all free thinkers together on the same page was a monumental effort, but they did. They got together because they all agreed that they wanted to stamp out the French academic system. They wanted their work shown. So in 1874, about 20 to 30 artists band together, and those include Monet, Renoir, Degas, and a group of others. And they rented Nadar's studio. We saw a photo of his studio to hold the show. And they called themselves the Société Anonyme. And boy, they were anonymous. But here's the most interesting thing. In the handbill or the announcement that they put in, they called it the Première Exhibition, as if there was going to be a second and a third. And there were 8 of them. And so at that time, in Paris, there were about 100 newspapers. And of course, there were that many or more art critics. And they were all up in arms because this anonymous society, these nobodies, had the audacity to stage their exhibition at the same time as the Paris Salon. And droves of critics came out to see these works of art. And although the artworks were incredibly varied and different subject and different colors and sizes, the reviews were not varied. They were pretty much the same. And they said the artists were terrible and they can't draw, they aren't trained, these are crap art, worst pictures ever. And those were the positive reviews, and everything went down. But you know what? Those reviews were probably the best things that could have happened to these anonymous artists, is that they created notoriety. So they went from the Society Anonymous to the Society of the Notorious, which helped them and their new art style. So Monet at that show, that very first show, he shows his painting Impressions Sunrise, and which catches the attention of an art critic who just can't get over the word impressions. And he says, these aren't paintings, these are impressions, they're glimpses, they're not complete works, they're sketches. So in the 1874, the Impressionists, they become the Impressionists because the Impressionists liked that term. Yes, this is an impression of what we see. So it was meant to be a derogatory term, but the Impressionists made it theirs. So I want this little piece is the port of Dieppe, and it's evening. It's all Dieppe is on the Normandy coast also, and it's a port and a holiday town. And the reason I showed this one, it has many similarities to the Impression Sunrise that he did this first showing. And it's as you can see, it's really a major change from that painting 12 years earlier. He had been, of the village street. He had been working on the light, capturing light and the brush strokes. And he chose this moment, this absolute moment in the evening to describe these brilliant colors and reflection in the water. And what's different about this paint, this canvas, is that when you see the village, the paint is very thickly applied. This is very thin. It's very thinly applied, especially in the bottom half, where you see a lot of the beige coming through, and that actually is the canvas. It feels almost dry brushed. So that dry brush look with the canvas makes it feel like a pigment itself. So this piece, not one of my favorites, but it does show how quickly Monet worked and how he captured that moment just at dusk as the sun has set and you get that sparkle reflection off the water. He was a master of water and light. Okay. All right, let's go to our next. There we go. This is the Place des Ateliers and After the Rain. And it's done by Jean-Francois Raffaelli. And he was one of the Degas gang. They all had groupies, they all knew each other, but they all kind of had their own little groups and clubs. And Raffaelli liked Degas and hung out with Degas a lot. And so when he painted this in May of 1877, Haussmann's vast renovation of Paris was largely complete, but not entirely. It was a little glimpse of Paris that we're still seeing that's under renovation. I mean, here's my favorite part of this. If you look to the left, the lower left, you see that large mound of dirt in the composition. They're still excavating. I mean, the renovation just went on and on and on. I mean, if you were born in 1853, by the time you were 17 years old, you would still never come out from under a scaffold. So, I mean, that was all you would know. Paris was being constructed. So when they're working on the freeway, folks, don't complain. It could go on for 17 years like Paris.
Kind of like the San Francisco airport.
Yeah, or the never-ending San Francisco airport. So Raffaelli, like many Parisians, he saw that the Place d'Atelier was as a broad, empty conversions of these boulevards, and he didn't think they had a lot of character or history, but what they had is that they were filled with light, and this piece exquisitely reflects that light. It shows the light color buildings, Rhonda, that you were pointing out, the darker roof lines, and a little over half of the painting is the sky. And it is this wonderful luminous light. And you can see the glistening of the rain that had just come through. You could also see, interestingly enough, in the foreground with the red pants, those are the French soldiers. And they were patrolling the area because in the 13 arrondissement, which is where this one was at, it was a little lawlessness, and it was only served by the omnibuses, and it was sparsely dotted, you know, with shoppers. So it wasn't hugely populated yet. So they were there patrolling to make sure the crime stayed low. All right, let's go to our next one. This, I'm sure as soon as I tell you the name, you'll know the name. It is very different, but very similar to Monet. This is Alfred Sisley, and he does not get the attention of Monet or Renoir, but he revolutionized painting in France. The three of them, Renoir, Monet, and Sisley, really made a difference. And this painting to me is more Impressionist than Monet's Impressionist. I mean, it is glorious. And Sisley never wavered from this Impressionist style. He found it, he liked it, he kept it. But he really struggled to find buyers for his painting. He was evicted from his house in Sèvres in 1877. Probably the same year he painted this piece. And this is the area that's known as Billancourt. And Billancourt is on the right bank of the Seine. And it's right where the Seine bends at the Ile Saint-Germain. And Lil, I think you stayed in Saint-Germain at one time of your trips to Paris. It's
No, I visited it out. I visited
oh, you
a
visited
lot.
it. You didn't stay there. Yeah. And so it was right across the river from Sèvres. And Sèvres was the district in the outskirts of Paris where the Sèvres porcelain was manufactured. And now it's obviously part of the western suburbs of Paris. And Billancourt in Sisley's day was a really busy staging area for the barges and boats as they prepared to bring products and raw materials into the city. So Sisley always did kind of working class. It was one of his favorite subjects, the busy, frenetic brushwork kind of showed the busy, frenetic river and the boats and the activity. But he also had an amazing sense of color and somewhat of a bit of drama. The Impressionists, again, as we mentioned, use little gray or black to create shadows. And so I want you to take a look at the grasses that are in the lower right-hand section of this piece. And you'd think that purple, yellow, red, some green, blue would not be a natural color for grasses, and you would be right. But yet it works beautifully in this painting because they complement. He uses the opposite of each, the complementary colors on the color wheel, and they make those colors pop. So it's just a vibrant piece. And if you see this in person, it is very vibrant. So
It almost looks tropical
oh,
with
interesting.
the colors.
Yeah, it does. And the Impressionists used a lot of these very saturated, bright colors. It's gorgeous. Any other comments?
Yeah, it seems to me in the last two pictures that the proportions of the sky and then the landscape would be contradictory to what they tell you to do in photography, which is, 2/3, 1/3, and they've had maybe 2/3 sky and then 1/3 of the landscaping with the more of the color variation method. Any comment on that?
Nice. That's a great observation, Rochelle. And that is because the sky is the color. The sky is the light. The sky is what reflects. The sky is the movement. And they wanted to portray that immenseness. And I think a lot of that was influenced by the Dutch painters when Monet came through Holland. At the time, the Dutch painted a lot of sky.
Yeah.
They were masters at sky, and they were masters at water, because basically that's all they saw in a flat landscape. And I think that impacted, but the sky is what makes this. And you're right, it's kind of almost 2/3 sky, 1/3 bottom. Not all of them are like that, but a lot of them did a lot of the sky. So good observation on that. Okay, let's go to our next.
Oh, no.
I in a way, I think this is almost my favorite. I think I've said that about all of them. No, but this one's really my favorite. This is John Singer Sargent, now at 24. Now we all know John Singer Sargent as the master of painting portraits. He was well known, and he had a huge clientele of portrait commissions. But Madame X, the woman, very slender woman in the black plunging dress with the very thin straps, and she's in a profile, very long swan-like neck, gorgeous piece. It's legendary. But this is also John Singer Sargent. And in September of 1880, Sargent rents a studio on the Grand Canal in Venice. And several other artists are also there, and they're all painting. And includes his good friend, Ramon Subercaseaux. And Subercaseaux was a noted writer and somewhat of an artist. And he had been a Chilean consul in Paris since 1874. So they had known each other. They were childhood friends. And I just love this painting because this is in the moment. And you really get to be a surrogate for John Singer Sargent. You are John Singer Sargent. You are looking at Ramon, and he's painting you, and you are painting him. And what John Singer Sargent captures so brilliantly is that moment when you have your painting equipment on your lap, and you're looking at, you're sketching, you're looking, you're up, you're looking down, you're looking up, you're looking, and he captures that moment when Ramon looks up at him. And it's just a slight use of where the eyes are placed and how they look up. And it is brilliant. This is, it's the light coming through the canvas behind him. It's rapidly done, and it's brilliantly done. And this isn't even the best part of the painting. The best part of the painting is to the right, the water.
Yeah.
And it is, I've been told, and I've heard, and I've read that that Singer probably spent no more than 10 to 15 minutes to effectively capture the look of that Venetian canal water and the light. And it's fantastic. The light's falling on the palazzos. There's 2 more gondolas. on the side, and there's a woman. It's just lightning fast, and it's lightning real, and you feel like you are sitting in the gondola, rocking a little bit back and forth, and that water is just bouncing off. I mean, the light is just bouncing off of the water. It's absolutely gorgeous, and it's a gorgeous piece. But I would never have picked this out as a John Singer Sargent.
No.
I had to look. I was like, no, that's not a John. It's like, yeah, it is.
So
But he
Lillian, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So Lillian, you got your magnifying glass handy?
Yeah.
Check out on the water, like halfway between his elbow and shoulder in height, but well over to the right, halfway across the water. That first creature, it almost just left of that, looks almost like a mouse or a rat. And I don't know what the other one looks like. Can you make anything out of that, or it's just light?
No, unless
trash?
it's supposed to be a duck or something, but it could be just garbage.
I think
Yeah.
it, you know, if you could look at it, I've looked at that, and I think it's garbage floating down the canal.
All the rest of it looks like it, but those two look like they have different form than that.
Yeah, they do, don't they?
Yeah,
They do.
Yeah, could be a duck, but the color of that water is amazing.
Isn't it gorgeous?
Oh, yeah.
It's absolutely spectacular.
But you know, I can really understand the critics when they look at they looked at something like this that was new. Oh, it's like, what in the world?
It's like these people didn't finish a line. They didn't finish anything.
Yeah.
You know, and
Slap
that was the
paint
whole
on.
thing with the Impressionists, is that in the Barbizon school, the lines are very clear and very delineated. In the Impressionist art, they allow the colors to mix, and the lines are softened, so your eye actually
yeah.
blends the colors, and it blends the delineate. You know that the gondola's ending on where the black is, but it's not a very sharp line, and the water starts, and it's done by the color delineation, and it's your eye that actually finishes that up for you. So
I love the white dots. I don't know what is shining on his shoe, but
it could, yeah,
it's just perfect.
it is. It's. I hope those who can come in to see it, and Rhonda, you being in Memphis, when this show comes back to you, I want you to go in and take a look at this piece.
I will do that. And anyone coming to Memphis who wants to see any of these, I'd be glad to take you.
Exactly. Well, it's on my list. I don't know. I don't think this show's out for another year. So
How long is the show here?
it's here till January 9th, Melissa.
Oh, okay.
All right. Let's go to the next one, Claudia. All right. So
Yeah.
this is, ballet was very important for Paris, and it was for several hundred years, and it was associated with the opera. And demand had grown. They had a new opera house that opened up in 1870. And those who could afford it went to the ballet. It was a social gathering place. And this is intermission on stage. Now, intermission then was not like it was today. Intermission today is you get up, stand in the line to go to the bathroom, you may grab a drink or something, and then you go back to your seat to catch the second act. An intermission in Paris in the 1870s, 1880s, is that the patrons, the patrons would come up onto the stage to meet the dancers.
Mhm.
So it was a meet and greet type thing, and sometimes it was just the ballet attendees, or it would be this guy may have been a patron, and this is
On-stage passes instead of backstage passes.
yeah, right, front stage passes. Anyway, the Jean-Louis Forain did this piece, and he's done there's a lot of his in the show. He was a prolific impressionist. He worked a lot with watercolor and gouache and ink and pencil, and he did such quick work. I mean, that is absolutely beautiful. But he's showing this interaction, and it's a very humane moment, and it's somewhat of a characterization, because the guy on the left's going to have a little pot belly. He's going to, he's got these overstated whiskers. he's glancing at the ballerina bosom, it looks like, but you don't know. She seems to be oblivious to him. So she's just adjusting her shoe and staring away, and maybe, who knows, maybe she's embarrassed. But he gets such movement in this piece without a lot of detail. And that's the,
Uh-huh.
and that splash of turquoise color is stunning. The thing with this is that there wasn't a lot of hanky-panky going on the stage because there were chaperones that were where all the ballet dancers were. So they could come up and oogle, but they couldn't touch. And so let's go to our next one. The next group, couple of them are all ballet. This is Edgar Degas. And there are Impressionist landscape painters, and there are also Impressionist figure painters like Degas. And by 1874, 1875, when the third Impressionist show was taking place, Degas was beginning to get some traction with his ballet subjects. They're very complex, but they're kind of outerworldly. And this is such an enigma piece for me, because the ballerina is in such a grotesque position, and a lot of times Degas would paint them that way, and very much modeled after the Japanese painters or artists of that 200 years before then. They would have the body in very awkward and grotesque ways, and Degas put them sometimes in those the ways. They're very effective, and the uplighting on this is spectacular. You can see her face, all the front of her body, the arms, her legs. It's just brilliantly done. Degas painted all over. You've seen jockeys at a race course and bathers, and he even visited the United States. He did a New Orleans, cotton exchange, but he is best known for his world of dance, and it really held endless fascination for him. And he just explored a lot of that human figure and all its movements and contortions. I read that he did more than 1,500 works of art and paintings and drawings and etchings. And a lot of times he would model the dancers in wax as they rehearsed. So
But he's catching that moment in time you're talking about because of the movement. They are in grotesque positions.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. Ballet dancers sometimes are in really awkward, grotesque positions, and this is one of those, and he captured that.
I'm confused by this one. I mean, I can clearly see and understand the dancer, but and it does seem as if she's on a stage, and yet on the other hand, it seems like she's at the edge of the ocean.
Right.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah.
It is because
it's a mess.
Yeah, it's very it's very complex, and it's very dramatic. And the only thing of interest in here is the dancer. And then he obfuscated a lot of the back staging or the staging with these large globs of paint, of color. But it only helps enhance the dancer. And you wouldn't think it did because it's so squirrely and squishy and there's so many squigglies, but it doesn't. I mean, your eye is just drawn to the dancer. And I think it's because of the lighting.
Yeah, it's the lighting.
Yeah.
Yes, the lighting and the colors, because the colors on her body and outfit are so very different than the greens and oranges of various shades.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She really
Right.
Susanne, when I see this, I can't help but think about in some of my readings on Degas, he was he didn't have a lot of respect for women. And he was what is it, misogynist?
Yeah.
So when I see things like this and you say grotesque, it's kind of like, yeah, he was a dirty old man. And and I think that it's unfortunate because he did a lot of beautiful things with dancers.
Yeah,
I
you're
mean,
right,
obviously
Pat.
he studied a woman's body and everything, but he wasn't, he didn't think very highly of women.
Yeah, and he did not have a great relationship with the ballerinas because he
Right.
was of a different social class. The ballerinas were considered lower class. In fact,
That's right.
sometimes they were considered just a step up from street rats. And
That's
he
right.
painted, and he
Step
painted
above
them that way.
prostitutes. Yeah.
Yeah, he painted them that way.
Yeah.
So they were not trusting of him, not at all like our next artist. And let's go to the next one. Toulouse-Lautrec.
Yeah.
And he had a very close relationship with the people, the subjects he painted, both in cafes. We've seen a lot of his work. He also was very influenced by the Japanese woodblock. And have you seen his famous, cafe prints? They're very flat. They have this very flatness to him. This is just a stunning little, well, it's not too 18 by 14, so it's a small piece, but he just had a whole different view of the ballet dancer, and he respected them. He in this one 1882. This is 1882 was a couple years before this. He was a teenager and he settled in Montmartre, which is Paris' main entertainment district, and it still is today. And so artists like Degas had already established studios there. So, but despite his young age, Lautrec, he quickly became a regular in the neighborhood's many cafes and dance halls. And he drew all his inspiration from the music and theater there for all his canvases. And so this was painted when he was 20. And it reveals, actually, he was a student of Degas. And this young ballerina is waiting to perform. And in this, it's very quickly executed, which also shows how Degas influenced him. And also Jean-Louis Forain, who we saw before, also they were buddies and so had a heavy influence on him. But what I love about this is that dancers' direct gaze and this casual pose, they make her feel very individual and that she's alone in this, even though she's waiting to go in. And they kind of typify that kind of bohemian lifestyle of Montmartre. And so Lautrec would continue to study ballerinas, and he became even more flamboyant in his style than Degas. And he had such a great relationship with the ballet dancers and the cafe goers, and part of it probably had to do with his physical handicap. So they accepted him as one. Anyway, I just find this a very human, very intimate moment.
But typically ballerinas are so thin and frail.
Not then.
Yeah. Oh, really? Not then?
No, you're right, Melissa. They're just stick figures, but they had bosoms, and they also had the way that the corsets pushed up the bosoms to give them that voluptuous feeling, because that was also the style of the day. But you're absolutely right when you notice that. You noticed it in the other one too. The ballet dancer was bent over her. You could see her bosoms. So yeah,
they almost look like can-can dancers, though.
Yeah, well, they were probably one step above can-can dancers. And maybe about the same as the can-can dancer, because the Moulin
She also
Rouge,
looks really young, like that's baby fat too.
it could be, and they were young. They were a lot of them were children that they were off the streets. They were sometimes the main support of their family. So whoops. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
All right. Let's go to our next one. This is probably someone you know, and you could probably tell me right off who it is. Don't look at the name, Pat. I see you looking. Okay, if I said pointillism, George Seurat, right? So around 1880, Seurat began making these charcoal drawings that were really unlike anything the Impressionists or any other artists were producing. He was kind of experimenting with these black and white, and then he started translating these sketches into color on canvas. And making them up with these little dots of paint. And it became known as pointillism, and it actually attracted a lot of followers. So in the mid-1880s, Seurat made frequent excursions to the island of the Grand Jatte in the river Seine. And that was a very popular place that the Parisians would go when they picnic a Sunday afternoon. You know, it was bathe. It was just a place to relax and enjoy. And so he went there a lot, and it was painted and sketched a lot of this work. So his very famous A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte is a multitude of drawings and oil sketches that he made there, this being one of them. This picnic, that's called The Picnic. It's an image of 3 children enjoying an afternoon lunch. And it probably was one of the oil sketches, but it never appeared in the final the La Grande Jatte. So he probably had dozens of these done that were sitting idly around and not used. But an interesting shift of viewpoint of Impressionists. Okay, I know I'm running a little late, so I'm just going to go through these a little quickly. We got a couple more left. Okay, we know this one. You know this painter.
Renoir, yeah.
Renoir, right. I mean, you can just tell immediately. Renoir grew up as the son of a tailor in Limoges, France. And he began his career painting china in his hometown. And that's what Limoges is known for, Limoges, China. And he eventually saved enough so he could pursue his career as a painter in Paris. He went there and studied. He befriended Claude Monet and Alfred Sisley, and he started to embrace this freer style of painting that would become obviously the hallmark of the Impressionist movement. So by the early 1890s, Renoir was convinced that he had, and he called it, wrung Impressionism dry. And he turned to his family for inspiration. He started painting them, participating in everyday activities. And this one, the picture book, was completed around 1897, and it probably represents Renoir's son, Jean, and gazing intently at a brightly illustrated children's book. And interestingly, Renoir tended to feminize his 3 sons when painting them, and he exaggerated their rosy cheeks and the soft golden locks of the hair. And regardless, this painting is such an intimate and loving view of the artist's son, and it's a charming and tender piece. And it's the style that he continues his entire life. But Lillian, get out your magnifying glass, because when you look at this, the brushstrokes are very, very active, very quick,
Right.
very, you know, and they're very rough. But he still is able to translate this just gentle and softness of the child. And to me, I love that little streak of yellow in the hair, of the reflection, probably of the light off of the hair. It's lovely.
Yeah.
It's absolutely lovely. Okay, let's go to our next one. And here's a name you will recognize, Camille Pissarro.
Yeah.
By the 1890s, Pissarro was one of the elder statesmen of the French Impressionists. He was a decade older than Monet, and he actually was a fabulous mentor. He mentored a lot of artists, and he was the only artist actually to exhibit in all 8 Impressionist exhibitions. He was a teacher. He was a friend, and he was an advocate for many of the artists, and including he advocated and trained 6 of his 8 children to be artists. So in 1892, he began a series of paintings of the small orchard next to his house, and then he looked at the river that was running near there, and then the village of Bazincourt, and it was tucked across in the hills across the river. And he started painting these in all seasons, in different times, in different lights. And he did this for more than 2 years. And he completed this particular piece, View from the Artist's Studio. It just has this clear, bright, unifying light of an autumn morning. And it's just this single, gnarled, old apple tree in the foreground. And it's in this same tree appears at least in a dozen or more of the series, but it's just a very simple and dramatic piece, but very complex. And again, this one, the sky is a little less, but still the sky is quite prominent, and then the foreground is very prominent. So you get this middle section, middle view of smallness, large foreground, and a large sky or the background. And later in his life, he had eye problems, so it made working outside difficult. So he adapted to painting these outdoor views from the hotel rooms during his travels, or through windows of his studios, like he did with this painting. But like Monet, who painted his water lilies hundreds of times, Pissarro painted the same scene over and over. And the whole point was, I'm going to capture the light. I'm going to capture the light. I'm going to work on more than one canvas at a time. Monet may have had 6 or 7 canvases up at the same time working on it, depending on where the light was or what time of day it was. So very interesting way to paint. All right, let's go to our next one. Oh, this is just a charming piece. The artist is Henry Tanner. He's an American. And we all know by looking at it where it's at. It's on the Seine, and it's overlooking Notre Dame. But what is so glorious about this is that, remember we talked about that light and dark of the Impressionists. The dark is all on the river and up through the sky, and that brilliant light is the sun reflecting on, again, those light color buildings of Paris. And and this on the online doesn't even show the blue. I mean, it's shown blue here, but when you see it in person, the blue is just is jewel-like. It is absolutely beautiful. I remember I think it was last month, when we looked at the art of San Francisco. We looked at the Palace of Fine Arts that was painted by Colin Cooper Campbell, where it was the evening and it was a night sky, and then the Palace of Fine Arts was illuminated, and this is very much reminiscent of that piece. Tanner was an African American. He was also the first African American inducted into the National Academy of Design. We had talked about that earlier on when the Crocker had a show from the National Academy of Design. All right, so 2 more pieces. Matisse. This is an important piece for Matisse and the Impressionist movement. It's the beginning of the future. And Matisse is on the Normandy coast. He's spending summers in 1896, 1897. And this is a very formative moment. And it's because it's beginning to move from the Impressionism to the abstract. And what's so wonderful about this piece is, if you look in the upper quadrant, the upper half, is that they're just shapes of color. And you're not really sure what they are until your eye begins to move down the painting. You see some white lines, and then you begin to see very strong horizontal lines, the black, the red, the brown, reddish brown. And you realize, oh, that's a boat. and that other must be the water that it's sitting in. And then you see the reflection of these colors in the foreground on the water. And so Matisse was known for his bold use of color. And he is actually one of the figures in 20th century modernism, and it's starting to push in that direction. He, again, of course, was born in northern France. He went to Paris to study, like anyone who wanted to become someone. And he studied law, but he didn't like, he's like, nah, I like painting. So it became his true passion. And he then switched over to École des Beaux-Arts, which is one of the main schools in Paris, and art schools. And they were, the critics or his teachers always said that he always elicited strong, often hostile, critical reaction to his painting. So he was referred to as an apostle of ugliness. And but he really stuck to his guns. He was abandoning his post-impressionist work, and he was moving into this more abstract style. So this piece is La Belle Ile. It's on the coast of Normandy again, and he just captured that moment with globs of paint, perfectly placed, and it's a lovely, lovely piece. All right, and our last one, I want to end with The Dreamer. And Lillian, I know you know this one. This is Marc Chagall.
Oh yeah, Marc Chagall.
Yeah. So this Dreamer was completed about a year after the death of his wife Bella, and it was one of the first paintings that he executed during his kind of struggle to come to terms with this loss, this horrible loss. It's a vivid representation of his dreams, and it displays his unique and passionate style throughout his, trademark. He layers colors, and so you see these jewel tone blues, and then they're on the opposite of the color wheel, the reds and the orange and the yellow. And he also used a lot of symbolism. The bride and groom float above a basket of fruit, and it's a traditional symbol of youth and fertility. And a couple of lovers, as you see at the base of the basket, they lie beneath it. They're having consummated their love. And then Chagall often painted images of Jewish brides as a way of honoring his beloved wife. So you see these more and more in a lot of his paintings, and they take on a more ethereal tone after she passed. And there's an image of a goat in most of his paintings. And this one is outlined on the left side. It looks like the legs are standing in the flowers or fruit, and it symbolizes vitality. And so it ends so the show ends with pieces from the 1920s. This one's in 1945, because there would be no cubism, there'd be no abstract impressionism, no fauvism, unless there were the Impressionists. So they influenced that next generation of painters, who then painted also outside the box and taking what the Impressionists did and deconstructing it even more. So that's my story this year. Thank you. This has gone on much too long. I got carried away. There were just too many juicy pieces in it. There's a lot more too. So,
well, you did a beautiful job, and really your commentaries are great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, it's fun.
I love that you're a history nerd.
I am a history nerd. I just love it. I mean, the stories behind it. I mean, we could spend a lot more time talking about the backstories of Monet and Renoir. I mean, some of these guys are real stink pots.
And sometimes what's happening in the background and the political and social stuff going on is not you understand the painting better knowing what the times were.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes me
Because
wonder.
They're not always obvious.
That makes me wonder what effect the art may have actually not just reflected the political, social situation, but maybe affected the situation.
Hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Man.
that's an interesting point for further discussion.
Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Rhonda, for hanging in there. It's now 9:30. Gosh, by that time I'm kind of in my jammies, ready for bed.
Well, you don't see much of
Yeah.
me, so
You-
you might be
Oh,
surprised.
well, Claudia, I'm
Thank
going to turn
you.
it over to you so we can end it on a very quiet.
Well, my friends, I'm going to gently mute you all. You may unmute yourself when we're done, if you haven't muted yourself yet. And I'd just like to invite you to gaze at this picture. I'm always interested in what will speak to me when Susanne does her meditation or her art show. And I hope that this one spoke to you as well. So as you look at this beautiful port scene with the light, just rest. Maybe just relax your whole body. And breathe in and breathe out. When meditating, some say it's best to lightly close your eyes, shutting out any visual distractions and bringing your awareness inward. However, another approach is to soften your gaze on this painting and just focus on it as you gently follow my voice. My friends, we've been here before. You know where you're going. As you relax and go within, this is your time. And now let your breath relax you even further. Breathing in to a count of 4 or 5, and then holding, and then releasing to a count of 8 or 10. It's that exhale breath that relaxes your body. So just release your breath at a long, slow pace. Inhale 2, 3, 4, hold, and exhale 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If thoughts come up and distract you when you're breathing and counting, just mentally note to yourself, thinking, and go back to the breath and counting. Tonight, in your mind's eye, I invite you to imagine yourself in this small seaport town of the depth. I wonder where you choose to be. Maybe you choose to be on the shore watching the sunset. Or maybe you choose to be in a boat, gently rocking with the tide. Or maybe you're in a cozy room overlooking the bay. So now as you settle into your space, what do you see? Where do your eyes rest? What colors call to you? Can you smell the water? What do you feel? And now, go deeper. As you look at this painting, savor the end of the day. Think about something that good that happened to you today. Something you're grateful for. It can be as simple as a hot cup of tea or a loving interaction. Maybe how beautiful the day was with the soft rain, fluffy clouds, magnificent sunset. What's on your gratitude list today? Or maybe reflect on how safe and content you are right now. Right now, enjoying the company of friends at the end of the day. And as you settle in deeper, reflecting on the end of this day, I'm going to read a poem by Dorothy Pearson, minister, poet, teacher, and friend. The sun went down on Tuesday. It was a full day. It dawned with all the fresh innocence of every new day. It unfolded its morning with promise, with plan, with vision, with dreams. A full moon crowned its zenith. Then almost imperceptibly, the shadows began to lengthen. Not unpleasant, but welcome. Welcome was the shade of the afternoon. The plan had been revealed. The vision cleared. The dream became retrospective. The sky began to spread the news that the day was done. The sun went down on Tuesday. Wednesday dawned with its own promise. O God of all the days complete, help me to understand the beginnings and the ends, so that I may let go of the past, and in doing so, go renewed and freed into the new day you plan for me. So as you gaze on this painting, my friends, I invite you to reflect on the setting sun and the promise of a new day. So as you bring yourself back into this space, and unmute yourselves, I will invite Susanne to share one more slide with us.
Oh, thank you, Claudia. That was lovely. Thank you. I don't want to share anything. I just want to sit here. So read it yourself, folks. I just want to point out that there are 2 shows already opened, Hands and Earth, which are contemporary Japanese ceramics at the Crocker, as well as the Monet and Matiese is open, and that's through January 9th of next year. Next week will be Towns, Trains, and Terrains, and these are all etchings and prints, California prints, so that's always a fun show because of the stories behind them. And then a very unique show of Stephen DeStabler, Masks and Monumental Figures. And it's one that it is going to take me some time to really dig deep into, because it's not a type of art that I become attracted to, but the stories behind these masks and figures are quite fascinating. So I'm in a way looking forward to it. so we might have a piece or two next year on this.
Whoops, that went fast.
That's
And
okay.
what
That's
are we
all.
doing? What are we doing next month, Susanne?
Well, I was hoping that we would have, we were going to do something really different and have what they call Art RX or slow art, and have somebody take a piece, a fellow docent, and actually it would be a very interactive type one. Right now, neither of them are available next month. So what we might do are portraits, you know, with kind of an overlooked, sometimes an overlooked art form, and then do the slow art in December. And it's actually very fun because the pieces that are picked, you don't think you could spend 25 minutes on a piece of art talking about it, but you actually can as you explore the colors and the feeling of it and what you see and what that feels to you. So it's a very fun way of looking at art. Slows you down a lot. So I'm not sure
Sounds like
unless somebody
something
has,
good for December to slow us down.
yeah, slow us down. If somebody has something that they really would like, let me know, and we'll look. I mean, there's lots of things we have not explored. We really haven't explored a lot of the ceramics of the Crocker, which I'm quite fond of. But portraits are kind of interesting, you know, but we'll see. We'll see how they go. All right. So if there's anything else, you guys have been great. I mean, you've been very patient and tolerant. We've gone way past what I usually do. And when Claudia and I did a run through, it was only 40 minutes, and she said, "Are you going to add more?" I said, "Okay." Wrong. Shouldn't have done that.
Well, you slipped in a lot more words around some of them.
Oh, yeah, I did. As I started thinking about it, and I'm going, "Ooh, I like that." And I mean,
You know, that's always one of the really interesting elements of these, I think, Susanne, is just how you weave the story. And so, yeah, don't apologize.
Oh, thank you. We didn't even talk about Monet. Claudia and I had a long conversation about Monet and his fiddling around with his patron's wife while he was still married. Like, these guys, their moral compass, began to wonder about them, you know. So there's a lot, you know.
The art community always marched to its own drum.
It does, and they use that as an excuse to behave badly.
Yeah.
I'm an artist. I need to have a muse.
Stimulation, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Bad behavior, yeah.
Exactly.
Well, thank you again, Susanne.
You're welcome, everyone. Thank you. I so appreciate it.
Claudia, thanks, Suzanne. Good to see all of you.
Yeah, good to see you too, Melissa.
Okay, take care.
All right, and anytime anybody wants one, if you're in Sacramento or you're feeling like, they just opened Wednesdays, so now they're open Wednesdays through Sundays, so that's great. So let me know.